All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Kendall Hunt webinar, Master Strategic Management, Elevating Classroom Engagement with Applied Case Activities. This presentation will explore a groundbreaking approach to teaching strategic management that bridges the gap between theory and practice. Before we begin, just to go over some webinar housekeeping points. This webinar will be recorded and you will be receiving access in the coming days as well as our presenters' contact information. Please feel free to ask questions throughout the webinar using the chat and Q&A functions, and our presenter will get to all of the questions at the end. To introduce our presenter, here we have David Stehlik with us today, and I will hand it over to you.
All right, can everybody see me and hear me? Write something in the chat because I do see it. If someone would say we can hear you. Okay, awesome. Well, season's greetings and gradings for those of you finishing up a semester of finals. I'm Dr. David Stehlik, and I'm an associate division director at the University of St. Francis in Fort Wayne, Indiana, in our Keith Bussey School of Business and Entrepreneurial Leadership, and I'm associate professor of management and leadership within the school. And I have taught at the undergraduate level for the past 5-6 years. And beyond that, I previously started in instruction at the master's MBA level and doctoral level related to leadership analytics, organizational consulting and development, healthcare and corporate finance were actually the first courses that I started to build and teach in higher ed. And then taught not just in consulting for leadership, but also how to do strategic consulting experiences for undergraduate students, doing live cases. And these are some of the things we're going to talk about today as we talk about mastering strategic management as a practice, as a critical reflection, problem-solving skill, and how we can use case activities to enhance the upskilling of our students. So I'm going to jump into the presentation. You're going to see me step away in a sense from the live view, but we will be coming back to the live view at the end. All right, you should see the slides up. Someone give me a thumbs up in the chat on Zoom. There we go. Okay, so here's our agenda. I am not going to go for the full amount of time that maybe most seminars, most webinars that you've experienced would go for. I'm going to try to keep this literally within the 30-minute framework. First, I'm going to introduce us to the problems in learning and teaching that affect teaching strategic management as an integrative discipline primarily, and how case activities can help us alleviate that, but then specific ways to use cases to alleviate that. I'm going to use evidence-based and inferential comments throughout. I'll try to let you know when this is just like a cross-sectional experience of my own and some colleagues, and whether there's literature to support it. Another thing is, I know you're here because you've got specific expectations to have delivered, and I want to deliver that value to you. If I don't keep that expectation promise in the midst of this part of the presentation, please put the Q&A question forward so that we can address it in that 20 to 30-minute period at the end. So after we talk about the learning and teaching challenges, we'll talk about the challenge of knowledge and practice that we try to also alleviate specifically within the discipline, and then some customizable solutions that I've tried to develop where I felt existing alternatives were insufficient for the goal I have, not necessarily insufficient as being good products or processes. And then finally, maybe some takeaways that will be of value to you generally, and then the Q&A where we can focus on your more specific concerns. All right, so what problems do we have in learning and teaching that we specifically, teaching strategy, teaching strategic management, or running programs in strategy development need to be concerned with? Well, based on my own personal cross-sectional studies of myself, our university, and some of my students, and I know students are persons, not percentages, so forgive what I'm about to do with categorization, but about 5% of your students, your top 5%, don't need you, right? They don't need me. Any professor will do, and they will succeed. In fact, they could probably have a robot teach the class and do something asynchronously, and they would still succeed because they love to learn. And I expect many of you probably are that kind of student where you learn on your own. Those students are not the students I'm targeting. 10% of your students beyond that need you, but they need you to excel. They can achieve on their own, but they need you to help them reach next level potential. So that top 15% are generally going to achieve and succeed in our classrooms, in our experiences, without us making much of changes in our pedagogies. But there's about 70% of the class, of the cohort, who need you specifically as the instructor to be able to achieve their potential for learning. And that is where I think the greatest impact concern is right now in teaching strategic management. Now, I'm not going to address the bottom 15%, not because they're not important, but because I think they need more than us alone to achieve their potential. And so they need more than great pedagogy. They need other ancillary supports, academic supports. They have things going on in their lives that our academic instruction will not help them surmount. But here's the thesis. We are facing a bifurcated future, right? We know students, like the rest of society, are facing excessive distraction, anxiety, cognitive load challenges, but they are without the same social awareness, social development experiences, and cognitive development supports to manage those challenges that they are facing that we might have had in the past helping us. But at the same time, society is growing and developing in technology and the expectations for these students because of access to information and education opportunities. Like every generation prior, there's this up and to the right expectation. So for that future, critical skills are going to be deep reflection and critical thinking and practice of that in application of knowledge. They have to, within their domain of professional practice, apply what they're learning with deep reflection to solve challenging, complex issues for the future. So here's the dilemma. The future needs students with reflective, highly practiced skills in focus and concentration so that they can develop rare and valuable skills to become strategic resources in their industry. And yet those very same students also need to be able to practice against challenging problems to develop that skill when they are personally challenged in building the focus and concentration and networking social elements of professionalism that would be required to succeed. So we have an opportunity right now with AI for experts to basically escape hatch this challenge when interns and new grad cannot support them as staff. And that's a threat to our students, especially if they don't know how to use AI proficiently to help them cover their own gaps and instead use it to cover their cognitive absence. I am a proponent of using AI in the classroom with students. So I'm not against AI, but I'm against using it in unsophisticated ways. So here's what I think you as an educator can do, and what I'm trying to do to move students along this learning trajectory so that they can be successful. I don't want them to be merely recipients of information, merely recipients of understanding a framework. I want them to be prepared to discuss with me, to partner with me in the co-creation of knowledge that can help organizations solve problems, and in the future, be prepared to contribute back to the field through their advisory skill. But this means they need lots of feedback to build that skill. They need to see shots hit the rim and bounce off. They need to see kicks hit the goalpost and not score so that they can make adjustments. And that means they need practice. And I think one of the best metaphors for adults now is probably the Matrix movies, though most of our younger students won't have seen them. And so if you don't know the story, the protagonist is this Keanu Reeves character, Neo, who's the new man. He's transforming through learning effectively. And he needs his learning to be tested before he goes out into dangerous environments. And so his mentor, this is Lawrence Fishburne, who plays this Morpheus character, who brings him out of the dream world, right, into reality and helps him see how good he can become through practice. Now, you might think of this in the form of Bloom's taxonomy and moving of escalation up the taxonomy. So we're moving students from kind of like the Neo character, downloading knowledge into their brains in compressed periods of time. And that's like your 4-year, 2-year college degree. Maybe it's your post-graduate degree work. And so our aim is to help them learn to create value through critical thinking and reflection and problem-solving application, but a lot's baked into that process, specifically in the form of needing feedback through practice. And one of the ways that business schools have predominantly done this is through use of the case method and teaching with cases. And there's a really good reason for this that is often never taught. And that is the relationship to memory. So if we think about Bloom's taxonomy at the lowest level, we're thinking about recall, right? The idea of you can't really learn if you can't remember things. But educational psychology literature distinguishes between two types of memory, episodic memory, and that really deals with recalling specific events or experiences that are poignant in our minds. And then there's semantic memory, and that really deals with general knowledge and facts, conceptual categories, and the like. So when we're doing case method instruction, I'll talk about some other pedagogies as well. We are trying to give students experiences. So we call this a category of learning, experiential learning. And case method is a type of experiential learning where we try to leverage the distinction for episodic and semantic memory by engaging students in an active, context-rich scenario. And that kind of stimulates the episodic memory development through direct simulation of real-world problems. And we connect these experiences, so these cases, to broader conceptual frameworks for theories. We help students activate and integrate that episodic memory with semantic memory, and that helps facilitate deeper learning and actual retention of those semantic category memories. And the interplay of these memory systems ultimately enables students, or this is the goal, to enable them to apply that theoretical knowledge in practical context in professional life and community life, so that they're fostering creative critical thinking and transferable skills that are going to be essential for strategic decision making. And just as a FYI, I mean, I am thinking about this kind of connection between learning and learning and practice constantly. And there's a great book called How Learning Happens that I'm going to be leading faculty through in the spring at my university, because I think obstacles to learning are obstacles to instruction. And so problems students have with learning are problems I face in instruction and teaching and that I want to address. And one of the ways I've done this in the past is through developing my own assignments and specific templates that help move students through thinking processes, like in decision-based simulations, like computer exercises where they're doing a multi-week decision-based competitive experience. I've also taught and presented on using asynchronous collaborative reading platforms like Perusal, which I think these things are great for what they can do and what they promise, but you have to use them a certain way in order to get the outcome you want. And the point with cases here is engagement. This leads us to the question of how do we get students to deeply engage when we provide them practice opportunities, which is also a question of do they have the knowledge and the episodic and the semantic memories to continue developing through those practice moments. I also try to use, as probably many of you do, industry reporting and facts and expertise from industries alongside case discussions. So there's kind of like ancillary support you might have at your university or within your company, research database access, where you can provide factual context for case discussion and recommendation validation. That's one of the challenges that students often face is they develop recommendations for a strategic concern, a critical incident. And how would we validate it if they don't have some kind of industry data supporting whether or not, or can invalidate assumptions they make that don't have factual support. And then I've also used the literature on how do you actually manage the activity, the practice of a discussion to inform how I not just bring students into an integrative learning environment using cases, and not just can you use cases in collaborative reading experiences online or in person, but how do you actually manage a literal discussion, whether it's on ground or online, whether it's synchronous or asynchronous, in a way that creates the dynamism that is important for co-created knowledge experiences. You also have to think about what kind of text are you adopting? Is a physical or digital text actually going to affect who learns and how much they learn or don't learn? And we have research on these things. And as an educator, if you are thinking about these matters, these are like the trees. You're thinking about the forest. It's kind of like the overall learning transformation of a student into the Neo character who can deal with complex challenges. And at the same time, you're dealing with the specific downloads of learning new information. Can you fly a helicopter at one point in time to solve a tactical challenge in the midst of the larger problem? Also, what is college about? If a student's at a university or if you're part of an organization, what is the learning goal? What is the transformation goal? Is it merely to assimilate information, or is it to grow together with other people? Is it to collect people who are pursuing a kind of transformation of the same sort in the same period of time? You're also thinking about questions of how important is collaboration? If you're doing it online asynchronously or online synchronously, if you're doing it in person, if you're doing hybrid, how is collaboration support, which we see today's students definitely crave this kind of reinforcement, this feedback mechanism. Do people agree with me? Why don't they agree with me? How can I get that kind of knowledge of essentially, did my shot hit the rim? And then if the material is important because my professor says it's important or my industry certifying body says it's important, and it matters to get a job or to make critical decisions that I believe should be in my control and not some other agency, do I care enough to actually then engage and develop that skill? Is it worth it? Is it worth the work? And so these are the problems students face. How do they engage? When do they engage? Will they engage? It becomes our problem. How do we motivate them when they're online or on ground, whether they're graduates or undergraduates? What about after they graduate? Will they continue to be curious learners? Will they continue to update their knowledge? Will they be evidence-based decision makers and managers in their organizations? How do we help them resolve the challenges just to get into the learning mode and then in the learning environment, take advantage of it so that they transform? And so I develop assumptions based on these readings, based on my own research and others' research, and I establish objectives that lead to presentations like this and those previous ones that then I test in the classroom. And one of these was if I used a random insertion generator. So I made requirements for students to, based on cases, they would have kind of like cold calls, but it would be randomly assigned and they would know how the randomizer works. So they would know it's not just me picking on a certain student or leveraging a student who's excelling and always willing to speak up. That gives everyone else kind of a break. It was a way of testing, would that help students speed up their initial engagements? And I'm taking this into account when I'm building learning materials. And I think this is what educators need to consider when you're choosing learning materials. You want to believe that your publisher, that your platform, they're operating under similar assumptions that you have that will help your pedagogical efforts be enhanced. You want materials that solve the problems you as an educator believe the students need help resolving or obstacles to learning that need resolution. You don't want materials merely that help students get assessed. That you want materials that help and exist to help your educative act and the student's learning discipline. And so you look at strategic management as a field, and I think you probably could agree with me that there is a content challenge for most textbooks, which I think we probably all love, right? Because we love the field. We care deeply about all of the interesting frameworks and mental models that can be used and how they connect because we care about that connection. I'm going to jump back briefly to one of these slides to share a quotation on one of these presentations. Down at the bottom middle column, there's a quotation by T.S. Eliot in his introduction to Dante's Inferno, where he says, "Hell is a place where nothing connects with nothing." And I think that is the challenge to surmount. That's what strategic thinking helps alleviate. This idea that nothing is connected with nothing. We need to surmount that so students can connect. Then when we come back to the content space of strategic management, all of this has to connect somehow. How in the world in 8 weeks or 16 weeks do you do that? Because what we said is a lot of this is semantic memory, and that's going to need to draw on all of these other times of learning that students have experienced, episodes of looking at a balance sheet, trying to evaluate cash flows for revenue generation. And so coverage is a major challenge in the field. You have to think about the student's learning experience really being likened unto teaching them, if you think about it like this, teaching them not just to see stars when they look into the sky at night, but to be able to see in their mind's eye constellations from the patterns those stars make. And our goal isn't ultimately so that they can merely discern constellations from the stars, but so that they can navigate by them and help others do similarly. So students have to have an understanding of what are stars, what are planets, what are asteroids, what are constellations as semantic categories. But they need ultimately to be able to navigate by those constellations. We want them to see stars, imagine constellation patterns so that they can navigate. And in our case, cases are the stars. The frameworks and the tools that we use, the categories are the constellations. They're the semantic memories. And creative problem solving and critical thinking using those tools and frameworks and conceptual knowledge maps are our navigation skills we want them to develop. Now, the problem is with all of that coverage, if you don't feel like an expert in it, that 70% of students who's looking to you that you have the most capability to impact, they won't feel confident. So if you don't feel like an expert in all those categories to illustrate the constellations, to showcase how to use them in navigation of complex creative problem solving and solution design, if you don't feel confident in explaining material, whether it's in a lecture, through case discussion, or some other means, if you can't show them how the channels through which you're accessing customer segments is connected to different value propositions and how that drives your revenue stream. If you can't show them, oh my gosh, we could understand that better through a business model canvas. And oh my gosh, with connection to our industry, we might see that there's a need to change our business model. If you can't show them that, then they will be not just desperately concerned about whether they're learning, but they won't engage and you won't even get feedback that they are not learning. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I think all of us probably have a deep appreciation for materials related to the field and those 40-page chapters with lots of examples, theoretical connections. About 15% of my students can learn that way effectively. The rest of them, however, are going to struggle to be motivated to do that amount of reading and simply to be able to engage in classroom activity feeling competent rather than feeling like a pretender or a faker in the discussion period. And so they're going to lean on those 15% excessively. And we're going to struggle as educators, I believe as many of us probably do, having our own industry experience, having our own expertise in the field to find insertion points to present that expertise. Just trying to cover all the content in these textbooks. You probably had conversations with your peers about, what chapter should I cover, not cover? Should I cover this example? Should I even cover a case rather than a chapter, or not cover a case rather than a chapter? And my surveying my own students has been that they love hearing stories from guest professionals and practitioners. They love those experiences. But they've also remarked to me at the same time, I just did a debriefing with students on Tuesday about this very topic, that they don't learn as well when they only hear stories. When they only look at a single star, they don't gain the capacity to practice. They don't have the capacity to learn how to make a story about the business the same way as effectively. They can maybe make a connection between that organization and that leader, but not the general skill. And I think your expertise needs to be brought into the classroom, and you need to not feel a tension like you can't bring it in because there's too much content in a book, as if the book or the learning material is the educator. You are the educator. I'm the educator. And that's why I wanted materials that would let me be that educator well. And with shorter chapter material, you also can own 100% of that material. All right. So this is my customized solution, trying to build out an example of what I think would do the best thing for that 70%. Like I said, the top 15% will be best served by doing more than what the 70% would need to reach their potential. And there are ways that I've created on-ramps for them to do that as well. But here's the general picture. We cover the majority of domains that you would cover in strategic management. We cover a lot of cases, and I have 2 cases specifically tethered to every chapter in the book, except for chapter 12, which is the chapter every student wishes they always had, which is a summary of every other chapter in the book. And it also provides templates for doing the kinds of work I want students to practice doing, like doing external analyses, doing internal analyses, writing up strategic alignments, doing their own kind of case study research work. This is the book that helps them do it. And I'll give you an example. So chapter 4 is external analysis in strategic decision-making. That's your macro environmental factors, your PESTLE, et cetera. That's your industry analysis using Porter's by Forces frameworks for profitability questions. It's doing strategic groupings. And the associated cases that I recommend for that chapter. And again, all the chapters flow one to the next, and then the appendix is where you'd find all of these cases in order back to back. And you can get an instructor copy from Kendall Hunt on the call here. The cases for that chapter are the American Airlines case and the Microsoft case. And you see an I and an F next to those two cases. I case stands for basically an integrated case, and F stands for a full case. And what I mean by that is an integrated case is specifically aligned so that students can see the constellations in the case. They can make those things out a little bit more easily. The F case, you should be able to find the constellation, but it's not as definitively kind of traced out for them. So the American Airlines case is a post-pandemic case, and so is the Microsoft case, which is about OpenAI and essentially macro environmental factors leading to a total industry shift. But I've used courses with Harvard business cases. I've used cases that are personally driven. I've used cases that are live in person with people, developing them through interviews. I've all kinds of cases. These cases are from Notre Dame's Mendoza School of Business and Fanning Center for Communication. They all have roughly about 7 to 12 pages of content with references and artifacts and examples within them. There are teaching notes available, and I've got my own ancillaries to showcase to you to support that. I ran all of these cases except for Chapter 11 cases this semester, which I replaced with 2 living cases with guests who came in. So I ran 22 cases alongside 100% of the textbook, alongside several other assignments for an undergraduate capstone this semester. And I did not have 100% of the students committing a mutiny of anger about too much work. In fact, I had about half the students saying, I felt kind of pressed by all the work that we did. And I had about half of the students saying, I felt it was feasible for a capstone course. But this is why. Because you can't cover all of those cases and cover 40-page theoretically driven textbook chapters. My chapters are about 17.5 pages, which includes images, some of which are half of a page in size. So you really have about maybe 13 to 15 pages of content, far more easily digestible by the 70% of students. But those students who want to go deeper, I have a much more robust mechanism for them referencing the research literature. And this is essentially what a end of chapter reference list looks like. This is probably one of the more lengthy ones, which is for the innovation strategy chapter. And we're coming to a conclusion here. I'm going to share a couple more things related to the textbook, then we'll jump into Q&A. These references are essentially proposition statements with associated articles. So I've built a chapter around certain propositions about that domain element of strategic management. And so in this case, you might see the bottom list. I know it's probably difficult to read, but it's about entrepreneurial thinking and blue ocean strategies connection to pursuing and managing innovation. And that's one of the pillars of the argument that is the chapter 8. And what follows in that reference list are articles that have accessible DOI links and micro summaries, because we know with AI right now, they're not great at giving you lots of critically thought out, detailed work, unless you're using like an open AI 01 model or something. But they do give you good summaries of generic information. And so these offer kind of a triggering event to get a student interested in the research stream for that proposition that helps build the argument for that chapter. So you can help students build an understanding of the field through both the research stream. If you have graduate students, they don't need to read 40 pages like they did in an undergraduate course on strategic management. You want them to dive into the research. Here's a way to give your graduate students a summary of that kind of semantic category in strategic management, and then drive them directly to research that is more curated for them than just saying go to the research library databases. But here's the real critical element, I think, that has helped upskill my students. I've made videos using this Lightboard technology on every single case. So you see here are 46 videos. There are 23 cases. There's 22 in our table of contents right now. There is another case. We'll see if we can get it included. Every case, I do 2 videos. One covers the discussion questions that usually are associated with the case, and the other is me doing essentially a Piccati framework breakdown of the case. It's about a 30 to 45-minute video. And we all know what videos are like for students who wonder whether they're even worth watching. What kind of metrics do we get on these videos? I've been extremely pleased that, for instance, chapter 5, where we're covering 2 cases a chapter, my 9th case, so students have done 9 cases at this point. I have 16 students in this class. 2 are absent from this specific session of case discussion. I do a case discussion every single period of class. 12 of the 14 who were present viewed 100% of this 44-minute video. One of them viewed about a third of it and let me know. And we didn't repeat the material when we discussed the case in class. And we did our deep dive into some of that critical thinking. But the video material progressed students' starting line in case discussion. So everyone felt their insertion point was already knowledgeable. And by the way, I don't offer any points for viewing these. So there is no reason for students to spend time even just clicking the button and watching nothing and walking away from a computer, because there's no points. They know they don't get penalized for it. They know I don't look down on them if they were to do that. And it has significantly improved all of the discussion experiences, because those top 15% of students who do all the work anyway don't feel alone. They're not on an island anymore. In fact, they have to justify their arguments even more carefully because everyone else is up to speed. And I do have students who take the transcripts from these videos and they turn them into their own notes. So students create their own ancillary supports as well. Some of the ancillary supports that I've developed for every case include an internal and external analysis, a strategic alignment document, and these quantitative tables. Sometimes there's information in a case that we want to talk about, but it's not easily referenced at hand. I've got tables for that I've built for most of the cases up to this point. I'm still working on some more. I've got quizzes for every chapter and every case. So 6 quizzes per section, and they're just 10 questions each. Then I'm working on an AI chatbot related to the material to help support students' critical thinking development, doing some of those interviewing skills as well, and then syllabi related to it. All right, that brings us to a conclusion of kind of introducing you how I'm trying to upskill and elevate classroom activities with applied case experiences, specifically related to business cases. At this point, if you have any questions, please let them fly.
David, we do have a question from the beginning from Judith O'Brien asking, what level, undergrad or MBA, is this best for?
Well, I'm using it in undergraduate capstone course. I think depending on the level of your MBA graduates, it would be maybe a different call. So if you have a highly quantitative MBA experience, and the way you teach strategy is to primarily focus on financial calculations, then this text may not deliver that for you. It's not going to heavily focus on them doing valuations on companies, for instance. But if you want students to kind of dive into the research stream of strategic management at the MBA level, or you have students who are coming out of non-business degree programs and going into an MBA program and they don't have the basics, this would really help them feel more competent and not thrown into a deep end. So I think it's a good text for a capstone and undergraduate, and I think you can press undergraduates more or less based on the driving of the research stream and the use of more or fewer cases. So I typically kind of run toward the end of students will fill their cup with whatever you give them, and as a result, if you give them all the cases, they will get all of the casework done. If you've read the article in HBR from years ago called Pygmalion Principle in Management, I think it is, which the idea is you can help develop the student's expectation of their own abilities. And often that's by setting expectations that they can do more, they can practice more. But this means you have to adjust your assessment approach, that when you are assessing them in doing more, you're assessing them for the growth that they are demonstrating and not necessarily for their accuracy from day one, but the growth in their abilities. see another question. The large reference lists could be research for the cases. Yes, it's actually one of the things that I've offered to undergraduates in the form of extra credit, where we have assignments related to the cases. We have these discussions that are graded in class. I do that kind of traditional case discussion grading. But one of the things I have offered to students as a form of extra credit for those students who maybe felt like they struggled a little too much and had a bad day or whatever it is, take one of the propositions and the underlying research associated with that proposition in the reference list and use it to justify your arguments about what the decision for that company in the case ought to be. So maybe it's related to, generic strategies, or maybe it's related to business modeling. And like I mentioned that one example, maybe they need to change their business model. Use the underlying research, some of which is empirical research of companies and not just theoretical research, to drive their argument in a short memo, right? This company in China did this company in Ukraine did this company in South Africa did this, and it led to certain results. Maybe there's a cross-sectional study of managers and leaders in certain industries were doing these things, and it led to certain results. And so maybe they use that as a justifying rationale, because that's part of the critical thinking and reflective problem-solving skill base we want students to develop, is to use justified arguments and argumentation in their recommendation set. And again, in the digital version of the text, they literally can click on the DOI and it will send them out to the direct object identifier page for that research article. How long does it typically take to prepare, review, and summarize a case study? So what I do with the students in those videos is essentially I do the Picardy framework, right? And the Picardy framework is essentially, can students do problem definition? Can they define what is the complex challenge present in the case? Can they generate alternatives immediately? And this is the reason why we don't say they should be inductively coming up with solutions, but they should start from a solution generation space, is because they've studied all of these other associated domains of or subdomains of business. And so they should be able to come up with, oh, this is the revenue growth problem. This is a Salesforce problem. This is a financial management, misconfiguration of debt structure or something. Then they establish criteria by which they evaluate those alternatives. Then they do the analysis that evaluates those alternatives by that criteria. Then they use that ranking to make a decision. And that decision should demonstrate that that which scored the best among the alternatives in the criteria, having used data to support that argument, is the decision you make. And then they have to figure out some kind of form of implementation. What I do in those case videos is I do a generic review of the entire case that way. Now, as I said, I don't do that then in the classroom. But instead, what we do is we immediately focus on this, and we assume that students can, if they have differing opinions, show where their analysis was different, their criteria would have been different from the ones I explained in the videos, or the overall kind of generic solutions to start the process they came up with were different. So they come up with more alternatives than I prime them with. The cases are about 7 to 8 pages of text and then some associated artifacts. And my students, I think, have told me they take about 45 minutes as average to prepare for a case, aside from watching the video. And they usually watch the videos, like most adults do, at a faster pace than I present it in the video, in the recording. I've also edited out uhs and ums and all that kind of material inside of the videos, so they're concise to just literally deliver content, deliver instruction. And it's like this. It's me doing it in real time with them, which they said they really appreciate, which is why they watch at about an 80+% level in terms of all the students watching 80% of the video and watching 80% of that video. So 80% of students watching the video, watching 80% of the video on average. Again, not graded. Sure thing. And from an instructor standpoint, you should be able to read these chapters in under 30 minutes. Like, this should not be overwhelming for you, especially if you've been teaching out of these extremely dense textbooks. You know more than what is in this textbook. And so if there's a gap, that's an insertion point for you as an expert to demonstrate your expertise before students, which helps build that partnership and bond between you and the student as educator. And as a result, gives them more confidence in your instruction, which helps them learn more. It actually helps them learn more when they're more confident in the learning experience. And one of the respondents here asking this question is an individual that I've learned a lot of instructional enhancements from myself. So thank you guys. I didn't develop or come up with the desire to be a great master educator on my own. I was just like all of us have been formed by great educators who are our professors, great educators who are our families, great educators who are our colleagues and peers. And this is my contribution back to those of you who want to do this stuff well and know how hard it is. So thank you. Thank you, Evelyn. All right, any more questions? And if you have to drop off, there will be a recording, so that's fine. All right, well, if you do not have any questions, feel free to drop off and we will close out our webinar. Thanks for joining us. It's been a wonderful opportunity for me to be able to present some of this material to you, have you look at this. Please get an instructor copy and give me your feedback. I believe in the co-creation of these kinds of developments over time. So this is not this is just the beginning of this path for this book and for these support mechanisms to help students become critical problem solvers, reflective, ethical, thoughtful, and creative humans who will help move us up and to the right, which is the challenge of this generation. Thanks again, and season's greetings.
Yes, thank you, David. And thank you everyone for joining today. As a reminder, the webinar was recorded and this will be sent out to you all in the coming days. And we will also provide you with a link to the product page if you're interested in reviewing a faculty copy. Thank you and have a great day.